This film acquaints us with a school understudy named James, who nearly sleeps late for his way of thinking class, and rapidly runs not too far off wanting to think, not to be late. The understudy enters the homeroom. Furthermore, we discover that the gathering is examining different mental analysis with the educator. One of them is a conversation about a monkey that has limitless time. What's more, will actually want to type Hamlet arbitrarily in exactly the same words, or about the trouble of picking in the analysis of saving the young lady on the pinnacle, or the trouble of picking in the trial of saving individuals in before a road vehicle. This bunch is completing their school instruction and the way of thinking. Teacher. Mr. Zemet offers the understudies a psychological try as an end-of-the-year test. The teacher takes the case and goes to the table declaring the states of the analyze as indicated by the guidelines. The understudies can utilize rationale and must pick which of them will truly deserve getting a spot in the underground fortification, the main put on Earth where they can get away from the oncoming atomic calamity. This dugout is intended for 10 individuals, however there are just 21 individuals in the analysis, 20 understudies and 1 educator, so, on the off chance that you can take care of the issue with a spot to rest and food, you can't make any meaningful difference with the oxygen, in light of the fact that the hardware is intended for 10 individuals taking a gander at the mushrooms from the blasts. The gathering should conclude who is qualified to live, and who should kick the bucket too, as indicated by the particulars of the analysis. Every understudy has special abilities and negative, less interesting issues. Our understudies take turns pulling leaves with calling worked on them, out of the container, while the callings are being given out. The teacher hacks a few times and covers the crate. Thus the first mental analyze takes our understudies to Pran Bannon. Every understudy names the calling the person has gotten as of now. The teacher takes out from the gathering a writer who has no spot in a perishing world. Ultimately, through casting a ballot, they select a rancher, a structural specialist, an electrical technician, a specialist, a congressperson, a fighter, a psycho specialist, a woodworker, and a scientist. The teacher says he will uncover his specialty later. The understudies pick Mr. Zemet for the final spot in the dugout, depending on the way that his abilities will most likely be more valuable than those of a drama vocalist. The remainder of the gathering chooses to separate and invest some energy. Separated since they should be together for a year. At any rate, unexpectedly, our understudies hear the sound of shots rushing to this clamor. They see that the teacher has eliminated those understudies who didn't meet all requirements for the fortification to save them. The desolation of radiation openness, under the affectation of gathering helpful supplies, the understudies get away to the shelter the teacher. Understanding that the understudies have deceived him, runs into the fortification. However, it is as well late, and the understudies close the external entryways of the fortification directly before him. Petra, a structural designer, can't rest around evening time, so she opens the inward entryway of the dugout. Petra sees an educator lying at the external entryway of the dugout with consumes on his skin. The man shows the young lady a note that says he is the one in particular who knows the code to open the dugout entryway. After that, all the understudies come to the entryway, yet dreading it as a snare. They choose to carry on with a year in the fortification and really at that time, see whether it is valid or bogus. Hence, starts their extended time of life in the shelter. Petra holds, coming to the entryway, where they left Mr. Zemet. Days pass, the understudies approach their everyday business. Yet with every day that passes, they get increasingly close to the occasion, at the point when they see whether they have made a botch that will cost them their lives after a year. The understudies attempt to get out of the fortification, yet they understand that Mr. Zemet came clean with them, in light of the fact that in request to escape the fortification you have to enter the code of the entryway. The understudies attempt to separate the entryway, and use firearms, crowbars, and even attempt to dig the entryway open, yet everything demonstrates medieval. Before long, the fortification runs out of food and the understudies needed to eat the dead circuit tester later. A portion of the understudies shoot themselves, dreading a horrifying. Furthermore, starving, passing at last, the fortification runs out of oxygen. What's more, the entire gathering kicks the bucket. This is the means by which the first examination closes while talking about the consequence of this examination. Mr. Zemet uncovers the mystery of his calling, and we discovered that he was the maker of the dugout. And it was he who introduced the code on the shelter entryway. The educator proposes that the understudies write their slip-ups and direct the explore again. The activity of the new analyze happens close to Mount Brahma. Yet, at this point, the undertaking is more confounded in light of the fact that the choice is put together, not just with respect to the understudies' abilities, yet additionally on their own characteristics and information. This time, the dugout is loaded up with a gay rancher, a structural specialist, an electrical specialist, a physicist with great hereditary qualities, a stock intermediary with gold, a noble craftsman, a deals specialist, an obstetrician, a representative, a legal counselor, a fighter with a visual memory, a landowner, and a normal worker. The yet again last seat in the dugout is held for Mr. Zimmett. The understudies who didn't get into the dugout get into their vehicles to attempt to move away from the blasts. Anyway, a bomb falls close, their vehicle clearing away everything in its way. The 9 enduring understudies and the educator race to the dugout for salvage around evening time. Patrick can't rest once more, and meandering around the fortification, she sees James the rancher and Jack the scientific expert together. The understudies choose to match up to consider when conceivable. Petra picks Mr. Zimmett as her mate, since James can't accompany her due to his direction. Some time elapses, however, not one or the other. Young lady gets pregnant. Mr. Zimmett recommends that the young ladies change. Accomplices to increment the opportunity of achievement anyway. A young lady named Bonnie is contrary to such managed changes, which she quickly declares to the instructor. Mr. Zimmett leaves, and before long gets back with a firearm. The man removes every one of the understudies from the room, with the exception of Bonnie. The teacher gives the young lady a decision. It is possible that she acknowledges the new circumstances, or she will be deleted from the Jack, who was stowing away in the room when Mr. Zimmett came in with a firearm, assaults the teacher and takes the firearm away during the fight. Jack seriously harms Mr. Zimmett. The man leaves the room. Furthermore, strolls toward the fortification leave the understudies. Follow the teacher and see him remaining close to the external entryway and control board. The man begins to enter the code and Bonnie rushes to him, yet they are not so as to stop the teacher. What's more, the subsequent examination closes in. Disappointment, James asks Mr. Zimmett for what valid reason he hacked after he and Petra pulled out their papers. The kid suddenly hurries to the instructor's work area and gets a container. James inspects this case and finds that the enclose has a triple base. The case are a few flyers with a gay rancher and a structural architect, and at the extremely top are the wide range of various flyers. James thinks that the educator deliberately chose to embarrass the person by making him a gay rancher anyway. Mr. Zimmett contends that James is off base. The educator looks at the person as a Plato's Stone Age man who trusts just in his imaginary world and his deceptions. James stays persuaded that Mr. Zimmett had different purposes in picking a calling and personality for James. Then, at that point, proposes a third round of the try. Every one of the understudies reject, but Petra and Mr. Zimmett himself concurs to another investigation, yet on the condition that James is presently a flower specialist. The details of the analysis put the bunch on a remote location. Mr. Zimmett, under the appearance of really looking at the shelter, conceals the automatic rifle and takes a gun with him. While the instructor was sitting by the shore, Petra comes dependent upon him and requests that he permit her to direct and probe. Her rules this time. The young lady herself will pick the people who will get into the fortification. Petra picks the individuals who, last time it was chosen to delete. Mr. Zimmett does not acknowledge the understudies picked by Petra. What's more, drives them from the dugout. However, seeing that they don't pay attention to him, the educator goes after his firearm, however does not find the weapon, it would appear. Petra took the weapon when Mr. Zimmett didn't see it. The young lady gives the instructor the weapon, and 2 projectiles. James, who had prior followed where the instructor stowed away the automatic rifle, presently compromises Mr. Zimmett and drives him out anyway. Mr. Zimmett says that the understudies won't open the shelter without a code known exclusively to him out of nowhere. Bonnie voices the code of the fortification to everybody, as she was standing nearest to the educator when he opened the entryway last time, and she saw the mix of numbers having a visual memory. The young lady without any problem retained the code. The last free spot in the shelter remains, and Petra inquires Bonnie to take it. Yet the young lady rejects. Then Petra picks Chips, the woodworker, yet the person outmaneuvers Petra also. Drives the young lady into the shelter, shutting the entryways from the outside. Chips takes the excess understudies with him and takes them by boat to another island, where they can endure. Petra, James, and the other understudies live in the shelter for a year. They invest their energy playing poker, paying attention to verse, and carrying on theater pieces. Soon the year in the fortification reaches a conclusion, and Petra opens the fortification entryways. All understudies see that atomic conflict has not arrived at this island. Our understudies keep on living impeccably well on the island, as opposed to the educator declaration that without a craftsman, a maternity specialist, a congressperson, and others, They can't assemble human progress and will not make do as they are going to bite the dust. A bomb shows up on the island. James is prepared to initiate it, yet Mr. Zimmett shows up and stops him with an advance notice. It ends up that the man has been living in the shakes this year, and has totally forgotten about time until he hears the voices of the understudies. Zimmett plans to shoot James. However, the understudies ascend to their companion's protection. Ultimately, James presses the enactment button on the bomb, and the example closes. Chips discusses his explore inside and analyze. So in the wake of forfeiting himself, the person takes the gathering to another island, every one of the men in his gathering bite. The dust by mishap. Since Chips is youthful, he can't be fruitless. The person applies his abilities as a woodworker and fabricates his own nearly nothing heaven, where he currently has a young lady for all week long. Aside from Sunday, since on that day he will rest. Everybody snickers. The understudies hand in their course books and leave. Yet Petra stays in the study hall. The young lady closes the workplace entryway and goes out onto the gallery. Petra is disappointed with Mr. Zimmett, whom she calls by his most memorable name, Eric. The young lady knows that the teacher made James a gay rancher deliberately out of envy to embarrass him and point out where he should be. Petra says that it was silly since James doesn't have the foggiest idea about Eric and Petra's association. The young lady declares that she is leaving with James to go to another city. Eric inquires the young lady to remain and accompany him. However, Petra disagrees, having kissed Eric. Farewell, the young lady leaves. The finish of the story stays open as we see two advancements in one. Eric keeps on going to work and educate. And in the subsequent, we see the man taking a gander at the firearm. This is the finish of the film. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Give this video a like right in the remarks what you contemplate this film, and see you in new recordings.